It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, the war in Ukraine and the UK's increasingly difficult balancing act of supporting Kyiv while keeping Washington on side. Russia rejects the UK's plan to put troops in Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary says Moscow is showing no appetite for peace, and the US cancels a news conference with President Zelensky the day after Donald Trump called him a dictator. Tonight we'll bring you right up to date, and we'll go live to Reading as well as Ukrainian refugees in the UK gather to mark the 3rd anniversary of the start of the war. Also ahead, the parents who say the army failed their daughter. Gunner Jaisley Beck took her own life following a campaign of harassment by her line manager and after she made a complaint of sexual assault against a senior officer. Today, a coroner ruled the army's failure to take action contributed to Jaisley's death. Plus, Amazon takes creative control of James Bond. I'll be discussing the future of a British cinema institution with no sign of a new movie anytime soon. And researchers say that wolves could be reintroduced into the Scottish Highlands to help the UK reach net zero. Residents, as you might expect, don't entirely agree. All that to come and much more here on the UK Tonight. Good evening, I'm Matt Barbet. We start this evening with the war in Ukraine and the UK's efforts to balance its support for that country with the need to keep the White House on side. The Prime Minister began the week by offering to put UK troops on the ground in Ukraine as part of any peace deal. But today, that idea was flatly rejected by Russia, the Kremlin calling a deployment of NATO troops to Ukraine unacceptable. Also tonight, Foreign Secretary David Lammy has said he sees no appetite for peace from Russia. In Kyiv, President Zelensky, described as a dictator by Donald Trump yesterday, says he had a good conversation with the American envoy, but a joint news conference was cancelled at the request of the US. Our defence and security editor Deborah Haynes has this.
The day after the US president called him a dictator, Volodymyr Zelensky hosted Donald Trump's envoy to Ukraine. Cameras captured the encounter, but no questions allowed, apparently at the request of the American side.
The meeting is taking place right now behind those closed doors. Originally, the President and Keith Kellogg were going to be making a statement, but that got cancelled. We've been told, though, that Volodymyr Zelensky is motivated. He has a fighting spirit, despite all this language from Washington. There is the concern, though, that maybe he's not talking to the man in the heart of the Trump circle, that maybe Keith Kellogg is actually a bit sidelined.
Still, Kyiv remains eager to engage, including FaceTime with the foreign minister. But the language from Washington is increasingly hostile and seems in part linked to Ukraine rejecting a US proposal to access its natural resources.
President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelensky. The fact that that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly. But President Trump is, as we made clear to our Russian counterparts, and I want to make clear today, he's focused on stopping the fighting and moving forward.
With the US no longer a reliable partner, Ukraine needs Europe to step up. Here, NATO soldiers training in Romania. Western officials say British and other European troops could be deployed to Ukraine as part of what's being called a reassurance force following any ceasefire deal with Russia. But the very idea prompted an outcry from the Kremlin.
Of course, the deployment of military contingents from countries that are NATO members on the territory of Ukraine is not acceptable to us.
With the war still raging and so many false claims coming from the White House, we return to one of the towns that Russia first targeted. This memorial in Bucha, a permanent tribute to the victims of a month of Russian terror. This is the reality of Russia's war. Hundreds of people killed, an entire community terrorized. No one here in Bucha believes anyone other than Moscow was to blame for their suffering. Yes, they're rebuilding their lives now, but as one woman asked me, who is going to mend our souls? Olena lived through that hell. She was shocked to hear the US president recently suggest Ukraine had started the war.
He's dishonest. He calls our president a clown. But honestly, you'd have to search far and wide to find a bigger clown than Trump. A circus act. That's what he is.
But no one is laughing here. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Bucha, Ukraine.
As we heard at the start, the Kremlin says NATO troops deployed in Ukraine would be unacceptable to them. So any talk of a peacekeeping force is in its very early stages. And without US support, it's difficult to see how it could work, as Sky's Gurpreet Narwan explains now.
We don't know what peace in Russia and Ukraine would look like, but we do know that the onus would fall on Europe to maintain it. This is Ukraine's front line with Russia. It's 640 miles long. The shaded red, that's territory Russia has taken from Ukraine over the past decade. President Zelensky says 110,000 troops would be needed for any peacekeeping force to be effective. And European military chiefs are prepared to send personnel, but the number in question are far smaller, under 30,000. And crucially, those soldiers would not be posted close to frontline areas in the east of Ukraine out of concern they could be attacked by Russia. Instead, this is being described as a reassurance force to support the return of Ukrainians to the country and to protect critical infrastructure. Troops would be sent to major cities, ports and nuclear power plants, which could prevent attacks like this one on the Chernobyl power plant last week. Satellites, spy planes and drones could also help in the effort. Fast jets would protect Ukrainian airspace and allow commercial flights to resume. And warships could be sent to the Black Sea to remove Russian mines. So there's more to this than the number of boots on the ground. But Zelensky has been clear. He wants more of them too. So how much could European countries send? Well, the British Army has around 75,000 regular full-time soldiers, the French 114,000 and Germany 60,000. Although only a fraction would ever be sent. In the UK, defence sources say we could be looking at just 5,000. And then there's the US, whose army dwarfs ours. So Keir Starmer has said the plan would only work with the US backstop, but the Americans have definitively ruled out sending troops. And whatever the plan, the rules of engagement will be vital.
All peacekeeping operations need the consent of the warring parties, the antagonist, for peacekeepers to be on their territory. One presumes within this operation that the consent of Ukraine would be there, but would we have the consent of the Russian forces?
For its part, Russia has said the presence of European or NATO forces in Ukraine as part of a peace deal would be unacceptable. So this is still very delicate and far from a done deal.
That's Gurpreet Narwan. We are expecting to hear more from Donald Trump this evening. He's hosting a reception for Black History Month at the White House. If he makes any other remarks, we'll bring them to you live. Meanwhile, as you saw in Deborah's report, we've already heard from some of his senior advisers this evening. David Blevins is in Washington, D.C. for us. Evening to you, David. What did they say?
Yeah, a busy day in Washington as President Trump's comments about President Zelensky and Ukraine continue to reverberate. We've heard from Vice President J.D. Vance. He told a Conservative conference in the city that they were on the cusp of peace in Europe because, in his words, Donald Trump is the most effective negotiator, a man, he said, who takes nothing off the table. Interestingly, Trump ally and Reform leader Nigel Farage was at the same conference. He told my colleague James Matthews that he didn't agree that Zelensky was a dictator, but did support the president's call for fresh elections in Ukraine. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss was there too. She told the audience that Britain needed a Trump-style revolution and there was a need for an Elon Musk to come and explore the deep state on the other side of the Atlantic, as she described it. But I think the most substantive words of the day came from the White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. He says the president's frustrations with Zelensky are multifold. He's calling on Ukraine to tone down the unfortunate rhetoric and to come back to the table and to seriously negotiate on that proposal to give the US access to natural reserves as payback for its investment in Ukraine's defence. We've also heard, of course, from President Zelensky himself. He posted on X that he'd had a productive meeting with President Trump's envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, and that Ukraine Ukraine stands ready to engage with President Trump to secure a strong, effective investment and security agreement. We are expecting to hear from President Trump, as you say. I think it's a fair bet we're going to hear much more about his pushback on diversity, equity and inclusion policies, given that today marks 1 month of his presidency.
It certainly does, David. Thank you very much indeed. Well, tonight, Ukrainian refugees in the UK have been gathering to mark another anniversary. That's the start of the war 3 years ago. This week marks 11 years, in fact, since the annexation of Crimea by Russia. And yes, 3 years since the start of the current invasion of Ukraine. This evening, many Ukrainian refugees who haven't been home since fleeing the fighting have been attending a service at Reading Minster. Our correspondent Ashna Huranag is there for us as well this evening. Hi to you, Ashna. I'd imagine it's been quite a moving experience there.
It really has. This war created 10 million Ukrainian refugees. 250,000 of them reside here in the UK, and inside Reading Minster behind me, there are some of the 2,000 people who are being hosted now by families here in the UK, left their homes, left their friends and their families all behind. Tonight's concert, as you mentioned, is about marking that 3-year anniversary. There are commemoration events being held by dance troupes and choirs and such like. But this is all set against this extraordinary backdrop that we've been seeing unfold over the past day and a half or so. This extraordinary and spiky war of words that Donald Trump has thrown at the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. And I asked lots of people inside today what he made about those allegations, those accusations of Zelensky doing a terrible job, in the words of Trump, accusations of him being a dictator. And they were not impressed. They were, however, reassured by the words of Keir Starmer making that phone call to Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday, encouraged by that move. And it's something they want to see happening by more of the other EU leaders. And I've been getting a sense of that from people inside.
I was really disappointed, what I can say, because America gave a lot of support for Ukraine, and it's like our friend. But now, I don't know, it's friends, or now it's looking like they're going to be friends with Russia. And I didn't expect like it can be like this.
All Ukrainian people don't feel support of America because it's a very bad joke or bad decision to do everything that Trump does made us for Ukrainian, because a lot of Ukrainian people believed that when Trump will president, he will support Ukraine.
If U.S. is stepping back, it makes me really lose trust in whatever is said, by the big leaders of the countries.
Well, I think you get a sense that they do feel as though their country is in a precarious position. They know that their return home to Ukraine, and yes, many of them do see it as their home because they only left there some 3 years ago. They know that that return to that country is hanging in the balance. They know that it hangs on a very delicate diplomatic balance. And speaking to people here, you really do get a sense and a reminder, in fact, of that Ukrainian sacrifice and what they have done to withstand Russian aggression up until now. They say that fight continues for them, and they do still have hope that they will one day return. But the moment they feel like that decision is not in their hands.
Ashna, thank you very much indeed. Next, the mother of a teenage Royal Artillery gunner who took her own life said today that her daughter should still be here after a coroner ruled that a string of army failings contributed to her death. Jaisley Beck died back in 2021 after she was harassed by her line manager, including sending her more than 3,500 messages just in the month before she died. Jaisley complained about his behaviour and had accused a senior officer of sexual assault. Our social affairs correspondent Becky Johnson has the story.
Jaisley Beck was lively, confident and good at her job. But as a gunner in the Royal Artillery, she was sexually assaulted and subjected to intolerable harassment. The failure of more senior officers to report her assault to the police was a breach of army policy. The way the complaint was handled contributed to her death by suicide. Her family were in court as an inquest concluded the army had failed to protect her.
The army has admitted that it let Jaisley down and has apologised for its failings. But no apology will ever bring our daughter back.
Instead of facing serious sanctions, the soldier who sexually assaulted Jaisley simply wrote her a letter of apology. He was later promoted. It meant when another soldier more senior than her, Bombardier Ryan Mason, sent her thousands of messages, she didn't report him, despite feeling afraid of being alone with him. Her mother, in no doubt, who to blame for her daughter's death.
The army. I believe that this was systemic. This has happened to so many other female soldiers. When it comes to sexual assault, sexual harassment and sexual abuse, the army should not be marking their own homework.
This inquest has put the spotlight on a culture of misogyny within the army and prompted hundreds of female soldiers to detail their experiences on social media. Tamsin Hort was friends with Gunnar Beck and served in the army at the same time. She says the abuse was constant.
I don't think it is safe for young women, or even not just young women, any woman in the army. It's a man's world, it's a lad's culture. You're a lad if you say things like that, or you do things, or you're inappropriate. You're a lad, that's it. Some people make your life a living hell, and that is the reason why I left.
From the army, an apology and acceptance that Gunnar Beck was let down.
The 3 years since Jaisley's sad death have seen significant changes in the army, including the introduction of clear and unequivocal policies to state that there will be zero tolerance to unacceptable sexual behaviours.
The family of Gunnar Beck have urged the Prime Minister to ensure immediate change so women can serve in the British Army without fear of harassment and abuse. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Salisbury.
If you're affected by that story, you can, of course, contact the Samaritans anytime. Their number is 116 123. You can email them to joe@samaritans.org is the address. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. Repairs to a sinkhole in Surrey could take months. We speak to one affected mum and ask, what now? Also, is it a licence to thrill, or are they going to do an odd job? Amazon takes over the creative reins of the James Bond franchise. And 1 year on at the Theatre of Dreams for Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But when will fans of the club wake up from their ongoing nightmare?
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back. The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing. A towering monument to the China dream and its demise. From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart. China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world. Mass protests forced the president to flee. The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor. Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child. The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them. A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide. Sydney's floodplains underwater again. This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Now, repairing a sinkhole that's affecting dozens of families in the Surrey village could take several weeks or even months. The local council is now warning. Homes in Godstone have been evacuated, with locals needing supervision just to collect their belongings. Sky Shaman from Mapal has been speaking to the mum of 2 young children who've been told they could be out of their home until the summer.
I'm sad mainly for my kids because we've got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old little girls, and I just don't. What they really need is stability and security, and until we know how long we are out of a home for, we can't give them that, and we don't know where we're going to be able to live. So I don't know what to tell them. So.
Have they mentioned any financial support at all to sort of help you through this?
So the council have said that now it's looking like it's going to be more long term. They will look at proper housing for people that are going to be displaced for months, but no financial support at this moment in time.
How do you feel about that?
It's frustrating because this is going to cost us a lot of money. Even if we can get a let, it's unlikely that we're going to be allowed back into our property to get, larger items out of the house. So there are things that we're just going to have to buy to replace, even if we go and live in an Airbnb for the next few months, because the Airbnbs are there for people to live in for a day or two at a time, not for months. So, there are furnishings and things that we're going to have to buy. My other concern is the fact that home insurance becomes invalid when you're not living there for more than 30 days. So we have no contents insurance. They're saying that they're going to put 24-hour security to stop people from being able to get onto William Way, but if in 30 days' time our house gets burgled, we then will be left without the ability to claim for any of that as well. So it's incredibly stressful. We were homeless until 9 o'clock last night. We finally managed to get our home insurance up in an Airbnb, but our Airbnb has black mould. We've got to stay there for the next week. We don't know where we're going to live in a week's time. We've got 1 child in school. Another child, 4, luckily, can go to the childminders during the day. But, we've worked really hard to buy the house that we've bought, and who knows where we're going to be living for the next couple of months.
Well, here to talk to me through the damage caused by the sinkhole in more detail is Dr. Phil Collins, Deputy Dean of the College of Engineering, Design and Physical Sciences at Brunel University of London. Phil, it's good to see you again. Let's talk specifically about this sinkhole in Godstone, causing all sorts of problems. What's your read on it? Why do you think it happened where it did?
It's really difficult to say right at the moment because there's got to be a big investigation to look at it. I think the cause for the hole that you can see is the burst water main.
Yeah.
The ground underneath is quite weak when it's hit by water, and that would have been able to carry away quite a lot of material. What caused the water main to burst is the question. So was that something to do with ground conditions, or was it something to do with repairs to the water main in the past or how it was built? Or is there something going on nearby that might have caused everything to move?
Roadworks or building work or something like that? OK.
Yeah, and there have been buildings nearby, so maybe there's something in that.
So it's quite sandy soil there. A local woman I spoke to earlier in the week talked about caves underneath that part of Surrey. Is there anything in that? Because you were talking about possible mining there previously too.
Yeah, there's certainly mines in the area. There's a quarry, an old quarry right on next to the site. But on the very oldest map that I found, which was 1868, so an old Ordnance Survey map, so a high-quality map, it has a feature marked very close to where the failure happened, which says entrance to subterranean sand mine.
OK.
And there are some historical records of mines in the area where they would go underground to find the stronger sandstone and then take it out. So maybe there's something related to
Maybe
it.
there's a connection there.
Yeah.
How common are sinkholes? Because this one's got a lot of attention. It's quite visible. It's obviously in the middle of a road, and it's affecting people's lives, which is not good at all. Are they more common than we realise, though?
They happen quite frequently, and for all sorts of different reasons. It's possible there are more now, but we have a sort of reporting bias now. Everybody's got a mobile phone or a camera or a Twitter account or Facebook or whatever, so they tend to become more publicly known. There is a little bit of evidence that suggests that there are increases in the years when we get lots of them. So most of them are, when they fail, they tend to be related to wet weather.
Yeah.
So back in 2014, there was a very wet winter, and we had lots and lots of these failures. And then we've had some drier years and there's been fewer. So the British Geological Survey monitors all these. They keep a database, and they have a team sort of looking at it. They're really good. And they kind of showed this big spike in 2014, and then it drops down to a baseline, then it maybe it's going up.
But you'll know in this Parliament, the government wants to build 1.5 million homes. That's 50% more than would otherwise be built in a normal year. They've got to go somewhere. We often hear about not building on floodplains. We're all aware of the visible impact of flooding. Are developers and builders doing enough to make sure that what the land they're building on is safe and secure and not suddenly going to sink underneath the home?
Oh, that's $1 million question.
It is. Well, it could be more. Could cost more than that.
More than that, yeah. I think there's a real risk there. All that sort of brownfield site, a lot of the soils there will be what we call made ground, and that's very hard to predict in terms of what it consists of, whether it's the same across the whole site or whether there's any holes. And assessing it's very difficult and very expensive. So if somebody's building fairly low-value properties, and that people's homes are relatively low value compared to some other developments, it may not make financial sense to do the most sort of gold standard site investigation, which could involve geophysical methods and
deeper digging to have a look.
Yeah, lots of boreholes, but also we've got equipment like ground penetrating radar and magnetometers and all sorts of things that can pick out ground variations. But they all cost lots of money, so it may not be worth it to do it.
Can you reassure people watching, because people will see that situation in Godstone and think, I mean, could that happen to our street? Could it collapse in front of us? Most places are safe. Can you offer some reassurance?
Yeah, they are. The places where the ground's going to collapse like that are relatively special places where there's a combination of factors. The majority of houses are built in completely safe environments, and most houses in Britain are relatively old as well. So if there hasn't been a big failure on them now, in living memory, the likelihood is there won't be one. There are ways to check. You can go and look on at the old map archives. The Scottish Library has a really good map archive which you can access for free. And you can just look at the 1866 map and see, does it say mine?
If it says mine, then you might need to call the authorities quick smart. Phil, good to see you again. Thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight. Amazon takes over creative control of the James Bond franchise, scaring the living daylights out of some fans. We'll find out what the future holds for 007 next. Welcome back. Some breaking news now. Police in Israel are investigating a possible terror attack after a series of explosions on buses in a suburb of Tel Aviv. No casualties have been reported in the incident that happened in the area of Bat Yam. There's a huge police response, though, and that's ongoing, with the public being told to avoid the area. We'll bring you more on that as we get it throughout the evening. Now, it is one of the most successful movie franchises in history and, of course, a British cinema institution. But James Bond is now firmly in the hands of an American streaming giant. Amazon has acquired the intellectual property rights to the franchise and, with that, creative control of all future Bond projects, whatever they happen to be. It's been 4 years since the last Bond movie and there's no sign of the next instalment on the horizon. So what does this deal mean for 007's future? Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, has more.
From Roger Moore to Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, through to Daniel Craig. As long-time producers and custodians of James Bond, up until now, Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli have not only had the final say over who plays the spy, but also the stories we've seen on screen. But now, in a dramatic plot twist, comes a surprise announcement that the pair are stepping back, handing over creative control to Amazon.
Having problems keeping it up, Q?
In 2022, when Amazon acquired the studio's MGM, that included its Bond back catalogue. The streaming service saying it's honoured to usher in the next phase.
Amazon had creative control. They know people love Bond, and they want to give people Bond things, not just in the film sense, but in every sense, with spin-offs galore and whatnot, which could be catastrophic. I hope they don't go down that route.
Barbara Broccoli, who's always been fiercely protective over her father's franchise, explaining, "My life has been dedicated to maintaining and building upon the extraordinary legacy that was handed to Michael and me by our father, producer Cubby Broccoli. With the conclusion of No Time to Die and Michael retiring from the films, I feel it is time to focus on my other projects." At Pinewood Studios, home to the 007 soundstage, this should open the door to production finally getting underway on a long-awaited new film. Of course, it won't be Daniel Craig throwing himself around inside of here, since he walked away from the lucrative franchise after No Time to Die. But it's highly likely that all this behind-the-scenes wrangling is why a new Bond, whoever that may be, has yet to be named. Of course, Amazon taking charge of the reins could also potentially mean spin-off TV shows for the streaming service. Something which Broccoli wouldn't be drawn on when I spoke to her about the Amazon deal in 2021. Does that mean that we might see a sort of spin-off TV show? Or?
We have not wanted to do spin-offs, so I think that's our position. They certainly have told us that that the films will be theatrical films in the future, and we'll see what happens.
Amazon has already had a Bond reality show. Now with 007 under new management, could the new reality be more of this to come? All this uncertainty, enough to leave any fan a little shaken and a little stirred. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Plenty more puns to come, because joining me now is the James Bond scholar Mark O'Connell. Mark, I've been expecting you, but were you expecting this? Let me finish the pun.
No, this was less of a thunderball, more of a wrecking ball, or certainly a curveball through what a lot of people expected. Yeah, it's big news for Bond, but all of Bond's big news over 6 decades plus has pushed the franchise forward. So fingers crossed, gold fingers crossed that it's a good move. It will be weird to not see the Broccolis totally associated with it, but their name will still be above that door, I have a feeling.
Yes. So, look, Amazon now own it outright. You think they're going to want to hit the ground running, because it has been 4 years since the last film with Daniel Craig. Yeah, totally. I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but effectively, you know, dying at the end of it, which was a bit of a shame.
There's 3 people somewhere that have well, first off, Sherlock Holmes was killed off in the 1890s, so no problem there. There was a finality to the end of No Time to Die. A few of us thought, and it was the 25th film. That's such a round number. Had they ended on 26 or 21, we might not be here. But I respect what the Broccoli's have done, and also what they're doing now. They're trying to, hand it on, let it go forward. It is not dead. I do think Amazon, they've got more money than a lot of people, and I think the films, we could have a speedy turnover now. Yeah. And I even wonder also if perhaps you know, the Broccoli's have left a casting suggestion, a little legacy there.
Well, that's
possibly.
the key, isn't it? Who is going to follow Daniel Craig and be the next Bond? I mean, there's lots of what ifs, so we'll discuss them all.
Many.
On that one, who do you think it's most likely to be? Aaron Taylor-Johnson seemed to be the favourite previously.
Well, dare I say it, we could go into a sort of a less European-American name. I have a feeling, though, Amazon, you know, they've been in the movie business for a while themselves. They're not just selling air fryers and hairdryers. They are actually producing theatrical movies. Amazon MGM Studios is based in Cecil B. DeMille's old building over in Hollywood. So they do have some theatrical awareness, and I think they are going to try and get this film out, try and get it done. I think it'll be quicker.
Yeah.
I think the turnover will be quicker. I'll be very surprised if we don't have a director and some game plan sort of filtering out very soon. I could be wrong, but I think there's a timings for this, and it's because I think things are going to happen and move it forward.
Any sense of what the story could be? Are there any of the original stories left to film from scratch, or is it going to be an
No, well, again, that's another thing. A new era. The Broccoli's were always very keen to have Bond set 5 minutes into the future. So wherever we were, whichever Fleming book they were adapting or using, it was always set 5 minutes into our future.
Yeah.
Potentially, Amazon could take it back to the late 50s, early 60s, and that, you know, the 60s were the cinematic heyday of Bond. Would they do that? I don't know. How do you then tie in all the Aston Martin and the car brands, and suddenly, when you make a film set in the past, it's always just about now. So just make it about now. But yeah, all options are on the table for the first time ever, really, which is interesting.
What about exploring the wider Bond universe? We've seen it with Marvel, we've seen it with Star Wars to varying degrees of success, and that's what people seem to be suggesting Amazon will want to do. They've already done it on Prime with 007 Road to a Million, which is sort of it's a bit like Race Around the World combined with a bit of Bond elements, and it's done pretty well for Prime, and a second series is coming back. But what about exploring that? Can we see sort of a Scaramanga backgrounder as to why he's got 3 nipples, or how Oddjob got his name, and that kind of maybe DIY?
That's thrown me. The 3 nipples has thrown me. As much as I would love to see Ernst Stavro Blofeld, you know, renovating the villa in Italy with Stanley Tucci, I don't think it's going to be quite that. And if it is, I think it will be based on who the next Bond is.
Yeah.
The next film, his Whitehall assistants, MQ, Moneypenny.
A Moneypenny spin-off would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Problem is that we always, when these Bond spin-offs happen, it often becomes quasi-Bond, so it has to not do that. But you're right, I think the villains, there's more to mine and pick and harvest from the villain world of Bond.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be against that if it's done well. You know, if you put classy actors and good directors and writers in it, I think there'll be less resistance than there might be, you know, right now.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. If it's done well, and this is the thing, it's so subjective. A lot of Star Wars fans do not like the spin-offs. They like the original 3 films, if they're, you know, maybe my generation. That's the key to all this, isn't it? If they do it well, it'll work.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the Broccoli's have brought a bespoke. The word bespoke is what they've done. And Amazon, there's a lot of expectation. I think, you know, good luck to them. But my martini glass is half full tonight, I hope. Yeah.
But shaken or stirred?
Both.
OK. Both shaken and stirred.
Yeah.
Don't ask for that in a bar. You never know what you get. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you. Well, staying with films, and a criminal mastermind, an evil penguin was honoured with a statue in Lancashire today. Yes, of course, I'm talking about Feathers McGraw, who was unveiled near his arch-enemies Wallace and Gromit. In Preston, that's the hometown of Nick Park, the creator of Wallace and Gromit, who unveiled the statue along with the mayor as part of the opening of a new multi-million-pound entertainment complex in the town. Now, Manchester United fans thought that Sir Jim Ratcliffe taking over the day-to-day running of their club would be a watershed moment. But 1 year on, and few are convinced the club's fortunes have been truly transformed. Results remain poor, with the club sitting in 15th in the Premier League, and their manager has said the current squad could be the worst United team ever to play the game. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris has been looking into the club's ownership.
What's happening at Manchester United? To find them in the Premier League table, you have to go all the way down to 15th place. They've been bad in recent seasons, but never this bad.
We are being the worst team maybe, in history of Manchester United.
But wasn't this guy meant to fix things? It's exactly a year since Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his Ineos team arrived. They gained 29% of the club. The Glazers relinquished control of day-to-day operations, and the biggest call for Ineos, keeping Erik ten Hag as manager in the summer, but then firing him anyway, replaced in November by Ruben Amorim. But things have only got worse, and that managerial change alone cost £21 million. It's taking spending on hiring and firing all these managers since 2013 to more than £85 million. None of them able to replace the great Sir Alex Ferguson. Sir Jim figured a new sporting director would be a solution. They paid Newcastle a couple of £1 million to hire Dan Ashworth, but he lasted only 5 months. Accounts this week showing that dismissal cost £4 million. And then there's the £9 million that's been spent on 250 redundancies throughout the club. And staff without the lavish football salaries have been warned of more cuts to come. And ticket prices have risen mid-season to £66 for club members, with no concessions for children or pensioners. But this tells you about the state of the club. They've made 5 successive years of losses, over £370 million. This season, they've lost 12 out of 25 matches. And that's despite blowing £1.7 billion in transfers in the last 12 years, way ahead of their rivals in net spend. And there's been £200 million on new players since Ineos arrived, but with little to show for it. Are they still the problem? The Glazers, as majority owners, they loaded debt onto the club. It's now standing at £730 million, and to service it has cost more than £1 billion, we discovered this week, in the last 2 decades. That's what still angers so many fans.
Ticket price is a bit extortionate, to be honest, especially raising the children's tickets prices, but also you've got to look at the last 10 years of what the hole we've been put in.
I don't really like Ratcliffe's aggressive approach at the moment.
Ineos have a lot of convincing to show they're on the right path heading into year 2 at Manchester United. And Sir Jim needs to address those concerns about ongoing mismanagement as the mood worsens.
Still to come on the UK Tonight. In the sport, we'll get an update on those worrying scenes in Dubai that involved Emma Raducanu. And also why reintroducing wolves to the Scottish Highlands could be good for the environment, some say.
Sunday, the Premier League is exclusively on Peacock. The league's most dynamic scorers square off. Goal for Haaland! Erling Haaland and Man City. It's a fantastic goal! Mo Salah and Liverpool. Time after time, he is Liverpool's shining light. This is the Premier League. That's just stunning! Sunday, only on Peacock.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland. and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. Coming up, why researchers say wolves could be released into the Scottish Highlands to help fight climate change. But first, David's here with the sport. Good to see you, David. We were talking earlier in the week about that situation involving Emma Raducanu in Dubai, and she was getting quite upset because of a man in the crowd who was then ejected. We've learned a bit more today about that.
We have, yes. Dubai police have given us a few more details about the man himself who was detained. Emma Raducanu, as a result of that, was asked what she wanted to do, decided not to press charges, but he has agreed that he will maintain a distance from her. He's been banned from future tournaments. Effectively, he's got a restraining order. And also a little bit more about the backgrounds to this. As you mentioned, yes, she spotted him in the crowd in a match that she was playing at the Dubai WTA 1000 tournament. Just 2 games into this match, she was visibly distressed. She went to the umpire's chair. She said, you know, there's this guy in the crowd. I feel, you know, very, very upset about the fact that he was here. The reason why is that because he approached her the day before and had given her a letter in which we understand there was his name and his telephone number. She opened that later in her hotel, and that he had taken a photograph with her. She then alerted the WTA about this. They then alerted the security teams on the Tuesday, and she was playing later that evening. But he still managed to enter the stadium. And I think this is the real concern, is that, you know, despite her saying what she needs to say to the people that needs to hear it, still, it, you know, wasn't prevented. But nevertheless, that's the line from Dubai Police today, is that he has a restraining order and will not be able to attend any future tournaments because he's been banned. This is obviously opens up the wider issue of player welfare, particularly security around female athletes. And this is something that isn't exclusive to Emma Raducanu or tennis players. So
it isn't, although she'd had experience of being stalked previously as well.
That's
so
right.
You can fully understand why she was so upset this time.
Yes, absolutely. There was the story of a man who'd walked 22 miles to her home and, you know, again, had to have a restraining order. So obviously this is something that Emma Raducanu feels particularly acutely and keenly about, but it's also something that Lucy Bronze, the England footballer, has spoken about. She was talking in the build-up to England's Nations League game in Portugal, saying that this is something that female athletes are having to contend with more and more these days.
It's definitely something that we're aware of as players, as female players. I guess that's the pitfall in the growth of the women's game, is that although we get bigger and we celebrate more, we have more fans, and that's amazing, there's obviously negative sides to it, and this happens to be that.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
You got more chance winning the lottery than making it as a professional footballer.
Players now, they have much more responsibility.
I've heard all the stories, anecdotes from old friends.
I think your responsibility is to guide them in the same direction as I went myself.
The route to the very top.
Everyone would like to be a footballer, but there's only a certain few of us that are lucky enough to go and be that.
Young people devastated once they've been released.
I'm forever searching for Matthew.
I've seen how the academies work.
Success is reaching your full potential.
From different areas of the pyramid.
Thank you to everyone at Exeter.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
David, thanks very much indeed. Some breaking news to bring you now. The Independent Office for Police Conduct is investigating after a 27-year-old man died following his arrest by Border Force officers at Manchester Airport yesterday. The investigation follows a referral from the Home Office, which detailed how the man was due to travel from the airport and then was then stopped after displaying unusual behaviour. He was subsequently arrested by officers and taken to a holding area where he became unwell and paramedics were called. Sadly, he was pronounced dead just before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. As ever, more on that story as we get it. But next, environmental researchers say reintroducing wolves to the Scottish Highlands could help the UK achieve its net zero targets. They say the predators would help curb the problem of the soaring red deer population, eating tree saplings and stopping natural woodland regeneration. Their study found that with wolves' help, the woodland could take in and store 1 million tonnes of CO2 every year. But as you might imagine, it's not a suggestion that's gone down universally well with some local people. Well, joining me now is Lee Schofield, lead author of the study. Lee, it's good to see you. Tell us how you came to this conclusion then.
So the work that we've done with colleagues at the University of Leeds is a modelling exercise. So it's using computers that are loaded with the way that natural ecosystems operate in places where there are wolves. And it uses that to predict what would happen if wolves were brought back to the sort of the remotest parts of Scotland. And yeah, as you said, it would reduce the red deer numbers, which are basically out of control. Because we haven't got any natural predators in the UK, our numbers of deer have just increased completely unchecked. So it's thought that there's around 400,000 red deer in Scotland at the moment, and they have a massive impact on preventing that natural regeneration of woodland.
So that's our paper for humans to cull, is it, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, culling obviously does take place, but it doesn't. It's not really effective in the same way that wolves would be. So as well as not keeping the numbers down sufficiently, it doesn't really change their behaviour. So wolves make deer move in a different way as well. So even if you've still got numbers, they keep them out of a particular area. That allows a pulse of regeneration to come in, and then the wolves might move away again. So the work that we carried out.
Sorry, Lee, sorry to interrupt. I was looking just before we came on, and there were quite a few wolf attacks in Europe last year. A couple in the Netherlands, a handful in Italy as well. So with that in mind, you can see why people living in the Highlands might be a bit nervous about having these animals reintroduced.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're not suggesting that this is going to be something that's going to happen immediately by any stretch of the imagination. The work that we've done is really to contribute to a debate that we strongly believe needs to happen. The environmental gains are potentially absolutely huge here. So yes, wolves can, in certain circumstances, be dangerous. Though it is worth saying that there haven't been any fatalities in Europe for a very long period of time. You're much more likely to get killed being struck by lightning than you are being killed by a wolf. You're very much more likely actually to die in a road traffic accident with a red deer, because there are so many of them. So, if you balance out those risks, the risks of wolf attack is almost zero, really.
Sure, but it's easy to be pragmatic about it. But it's like telling someone who's afraid of flying, don't go on a plane, even though statistically it's safer. There's something emotional about the wolf, isn't there? We haven't had them here for 200 years. So can you understand that reaction?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it is a very real concern, and we're not trying to belittle that at all. But so is climate change, right? We need to be using every single tool that's available to us. There are going to be, there's no risk of wolves attacking us on a dead planet, right? We need to think about what is coming down the road towards us in terms of the climate and the biodiversity crisis. And if we don't at least give these kinds of ideas proper consideration, then we are basically damning future generations. That's how critical it is, I think.
That is certainly an interesting point. Just as we finish off, Lee, we've seen other successful rewilding done, beavers in particular, but less successful attempts by people trying to do it on their own. It seemed like someone was trying to do that with lynx in the Highlands in recent months. And of course, those creatures suffered as a result. You have to be very careful about doing this properly if it does happen.
Absolutely. There is a very strict set of rules and protocols around all of this stuff. And, fundamental to those are proper engagement with the people who would be affected and considering what the implications would be and how those implications potentially could be mitigated. Wolves now have reoccupied almost their entire former range in Europe. The only reason they're not in the UK is because the channel prevents them from getting here. And people are finding ways to live more or less harmoniously with wolves. And, there's a lot that we can learn from experiences in Europe.
Plenty of people do live alongside these kind of creatures very well indeed. You're absolutely right. Lee, appreciate you talking to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
It is time for a quick look at the weather before we go. The next few days are going to be mild with spells of wind and rain, but Saturday doesn't look too bad for most. In fact, most places will be dry this evening too, with winds easing, but there'll be a few sharp showers around. It'll also be grey and damp across southeast England. After a largely dry start to the night, more rain is going to move in from the southwest, spreading to most places later. It'll be mild to very mild in the south, in fact, but the wind will pick up again from the west. Tomorrow morning looks cloudy with outbreaks of heavy rain, but central and eastern England will be mainly dry with sunny spells. That's all from me and the team here on the UK Tonight. You can catch up on all the highlights on our webpage. Just scan the QR code that's coming up on the screen right now. Next, it's The World with Gillian Joseph. The UK Tonight back on Monday, 8 o'clock. See you then. Bye-bye.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.